Okay, so now we got to talk about deductive reasoning, and there's two rules in deductive reasoning we're going to use, and the first one we're talking about is law of detachment. So they're going to give us two sentences. One of the sentences is an if-then statement. Okay, so given if P then Q. So if some hypothesis then some conclusion. Okay, so that's the first sentence. And then they give you another sentence that says P is true. So the sentence they give you next is the hypothesis. Then you're going to conclude Q is true. Okay, so they give you a conditional. So if hypothesis then conclusion. The next sentence is the hypothesis. Then you conclude and write the conclusion. Okay, so if I look at this example, if you pass algebra 1, then you take geometry, you passed algebra 1. The first sentence right there, I see, is an if-then sentence. So I'm going to underline the hypothesis and circle the conclusion, just like we've done like 1,000 times, okay? Hypothesis and conclusion. I look at the next sentence. The next sentence, was it the hypothesis or was it the conclusion? Well, it said you passed algebra 1. The you passed algebra 1, that was the hypothesis again. That's not crossing out. That's underlining. So this is the hypothesis again. So if the second sentence they give me is the hypothesis, then what conclusion do I make? All I have to do is write the conclusion from the sentence. So if we know if you pass algebra 1, then you take geometry, you passed algebra 1, the conclusion is you take geometry. That's what you would write as your answer, okay? But sometimes the second sentence they give you is not always the hypothesis. So let's look at the second example. So the second example says, if you live in Houston, then you live in Texas. The second sentence is you live in Texas. So in my first sentence, my conditional statement, the if-then, I'm underlining my hypothesis, which we know is between the words if and then. I circle the conclusion. I look at the second sentence. Is this sentence the hypothesis or the conclusion? Well, this said you live in Texas. The Texas part was the conclusion, so I'm going to circle this. This is the conclusion. Okay? So if they give me the conclusion, then what conclusion do I make? Is that there's no conclusion. And that's what I write as my answer. Okay? Because just because you live in Texas, I cannot conclude based on that information that you also live in Houston. That is not necessarily true. So what do we write? No conclusion. Okay? So we see the difference between these two examples. This one, they gave us the hypothesis. We wrote the conclusion. This one, they gave us the conclusion. So what do we write? There's no conclusion. We cannot make any statements about this sentence. So that was law of detachment. The next law is the law of syllogism, which it says right there. So in this one, they are giving you two if-then statements. So if P then Q, and if Q then R. So we're seeing parts of the sentences they give you should be repeating. That's why there's two Q's in there, okay? So parts of the sentence is repeating. In one sentence, it is the conclusion, and in the other sentence, it is the hypothesis. So the conclusion we're going to write is another conditional statement, an if-then statement, but we're going to say if P then R, okay? So basically we get rid of the part of the sentences that repeat, and we're only writing if P then R. Okay, so let's look at these examples. If you live in Los Angeles, then you live in California. If you live in California, then you live in the United States. So I can see they gave me two if-then sentences. This is different from the examples we just did because this is two if-then sentences. I'm checking for the part that repeats. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Which part of the sentences repeats? That's the key. So, which part repeated? I see something about Los Angeles and then California. And then California. Oh, that was repeating. right there. This and this repeated. We see that. You live in California, you live in California. So that, we cross it off. That's the part we are not going to write anymore when I write my conclusion down here. So what conclusion am I going to make? Well, if I'm not writing the part about California, then all I got left is the part about if you live in Los Angeles, then you live in the United States. So that is what I write, which I'm actually going to end up typing. Here we go. Holy cow, that's large. There we go. If you live in Los Angeles, then you live in the that's not how you spell it, United States. There. Okay? So all I did was I got rid of the part that repeated. I don't put the then and the if that went with the repeated part anymore. Whichever said if first still says if. Whichever said then from before still says then. Okay? Let's look at the next example. If you go trick-or-treating, then you get candy. If it is Halloween, then you go trick-or-treating. So again, I'm looking for which part repeated. Well, I see trick-or-treating and candy and Halloween and trick-or-treating. So the part that should be repeating is this stuff about trick-or-treating. So I'm going to bubble that stuff in, because we're not going to be writing that in my conclusion. Okay? So the part that I am writing first should still be the if part, because I have to keep it in the same order. Okay? It should be if something, then something. Okay? Now, in my original sentence, what was written first was the you get candy. But that had the word then before it. Okay? So in my new sentence, it's still going to be the then part, which we know then comes after the word if. So here's my word if. So then I would type this in my sentence first, because ifs go first. So it's going to be if it is Halloween, then you get candy. Okay? We're noticing even though candy was talked about in the first sentence up here, it's going to be written in the second part as the conclusion of my sentence. And this goes here because that had the word if, so I still put the word if first. If you have any questions, go back and rewatch the video, but other than that, you can go ahead and get started on your formative.